Well, good afternoon. Thank you very much for joining us for this discussion about impunity. At the end of the day, safety of journalists, it is the number one priority, and it is the number one issue that journalists in many parts of the world are facing. And as we can see around this room, these are just some of the examples of the journalists who have lost their lives, who have been killed for their work. And the appalling fact is that impunity is still not investigated properly by the states, and the killers in most cases remain free. And it is my honor to pass the floor to our board member, Sami Zeidan, who is on the board of IPI, but his main position is the principal presenter at Al Jazeera Network English. And of course, as it was released yesterday by the IPI Congress, by the IPI members, a resolution on impunity, condemning impunity, and of course mentioning the two important cases which are still unresolved, the case of Shireen Abu Akleh, and of course the case of Jamal Khashoggi, which are still not been accounted for. So I would pass the floor to Sami, and thank you very much for moderating and hosting this panel.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much, Frane, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming. We look forward to a lively, engaging discussion today. We've got a fabulous panel of preeminent journalists and officials working in the area of journalism and deeply impacted by the issue of impunity for journalist killings. My name's Sami Zeidan, as Frane kindly pointed out. The job I get paid for is presenting on TV, and my passion I don't get paid for is working with organizations like this to try and improve the conditions for journalists. So my great thanks to the IPI once again, and to Frane for convening this session and giving me a chance to be part of it. I hope we're going to have a really good exchange. So we're going to give some time at the end for questions. So do think of any questions that you have. We'll be delighted to make time to take them from you. Let me start by introducing the panel up here. So we have this gentleman who is an icon in his own right amongst reporters in the Arab world. Walid Al-Omari is the Al Jazeera Arabic Jerusalem bureau chief, and we're delighted he could be here. Thanks so much. And we're glad you've managed to make it out. I know it's not easy traveling from where you had to come from. And we're absolutely delighted as well to have someone from a region that's also familiar to me. Ivana Stevanovic is the executive director for the Slavko Churovia Foundation. And for those who are not familiar, it's a very important case, which I'm sure Ivana is going to update us on. And we're also delighted to have up on the panel with us Jürgen Heissel, Director for the Representative on Freedom of Media for the Organization of Security and Cooperation on Europe. And I think I managed not to mess up the title, right? So, all right. So this is how I'm hoping we're going to proceed. Rather than having a series of speeches from the panelists one by one, I thought let's kick off with some common questions which will pass between the panelists. And I want to say this. Feel free, Ivana, Walid, and Jürgen, if during the first question, if one of you is speaking, if you want to jump in to add something, feel free to do this. Let's try and make this less of a lecture, get out the straitjacket of that formality a little bit, and make it more of a discussion. Does that sound good? All right. All right, so let's start with the obvious first question. There's been a lot of issues having to do with killings of journalists, and all of our panelists up here are connected in different ways with that issue. Maybe we'll start with one of the recent ones, the killing of Shireen Abu Akleh. I'm sure many of you are familiar with her. She was a journalist with Al Jazeera Arabic Network, and she was shot dead. Several investigations, international investigations by human rights groups, by journalistic organizations, international journalistic organizations, have pointed the finger at Israeli authorities. Walid, we know that a court case has been lodged. Tell us where things stand on that issue. Where are we at? I think it should be active. I assume someone's on the sound desk back there. Yeah, we just need to talk.
Thank you, Sami. Thank you all, and thank you, International Press Institute, IPI, for giving me this opportunity to share with you the deep grief that my colleagues and I suffering since the killing of Shirin Abu Akleh in the 11th of May last year. We approaching the 7 months since we submitted the case to the ICC, the International Criminal Court, and we still awaiting to hear updating from the chief prosecutor of the ICC until now. If Mr. Karim Khan, the chief of prosecutors in the International Criminal Court, froze or ignore or keep calm in this case, it means to us that Mr. Karim Khan betrays the credibility of the position that he holds, and in the same time that has failed to fulfill his duty.
Are you worried about that, Walid?
I am worried because the double standards in this world is huge, and it's the risk is very high. Until now, as I mentioned, 7 months, and we didn't hear anything from this gentleman. We waiting for his updating. When we submitted our file to the ICC, it was after several investigations, including the many independent and international investigations, including the CNN and the New York Times and Washington Post and all of them, including Al Jazeera and B'Tselem, the Israeli human rights organization, Bengelkat, and the famous forensic architecture with Al-Haq, the Palestinian Human Rights Watch, and at least the last week also we have these 2 experts from the United States of America and Great Britain who appears in the program of Tamer al-Mishal, the Ma Khafiya A'dam, and all the investigations, including the Attorney General, Palestinian Attorney General report, and many other things, and the Guardians. All of them, they confirmed the facts. And the facts, it's very clear. He didn't need what we're waiting from the prosecutor just to declare that, or he coming to visit and to investigate by himself.
The beginning of the investigative process.
Or to have independent international investigative team who will work for this issue. At least what we demand here is justice for Shirin. And when we demand justice for Shirin, first, we want to hold the killer accountable. And at the same time, also, we want to protect ourselves as a journalist in general, and as a journalist, Palestinian journalist, and Al Jazeera journalist in particular, to do our duties, professional duties, without any risk, because this Shirin, you know, Sami,
let me say
that. Since 2001 until now, 20 Palestinian journalists, 2 of them, they are foreigners from Britain and Italy. They were killed by the Israelis. And until now, nobody held accountability around this killing in the Palestinian territory.
We'll come back to some of those points. You covered a lot. We'll come back to them in a minute. But on the theme of where we're at, I wanted to do a little comparison, Walid, with where we're at with another famous case in another part of the world. So as Walid was pointing out, 7 months and awaiting, really, the serious beginning of an investigative team or process to start. It's been a lot longer, hasn't it, Ivana, for the case that your foundation works on. Maybe we should give people a little bit of background first. Slavko Churovir, for those who are not familiar with him, was a famous journalist in Serbia, and he was quite critical of the government back in the Slobodan Milosevic era, and he was murdered. And I think we've had confessions from some ranks of people implying, but the case hasn't, it's been now so long, what, more than
24 years.
24
exactly.
years.
We
So
marked
where are
24
you?
years 1 month ago from the killing. We are now in the final stage of the trial for murder of Slavko Čirovija. During the next month or so, we are expecting to hear a final and binding verdict by the appeal court in Serbia. But what is, when I listen to the 7-month period of waiting, we are waiting for the justice for 24 whole years. It is obvious, and this trial has demonstrated that this murder was inspired by the state, was organized by the state, was publicly announced by the state, and was
Ivana, give us an idea of what indication or evidence for that, for people who are unfamiliar and say, okay, how are we making these statements?
So we've been waiting for the serious and meaningful investigation of the crime for the whole 13 or 14 years. When Commission for Investigation of Killed Journalists was established in 2012, we saw the first breakthrough proofs being gathered, and it ultimately led to 4 former state security officials being accused for the murder and trialed for that murder. We had 2 first-degree sentences which found the accused guilty and convicted them to in the total of 100 years in prison. But unfortunately, the verdict was overthrown by appeal court, and the appeal court had the sessions in March this year. And as I said, we are now waiting for this final and binding verdict. And I have to say this verdict will really be a crossroads for the whole Serbian society. The case of the Slavko Čirovija has gone beyond just seeking justice for one journalist and one family. It is now a paradigm case for the whole overall rule of law in Serbia and dismantling the state security. So this verdict will demonstrate very clearly whether the Serbian society can deal with the past and can make some steps towards the establishment of the rule of law, or it will reinforce the toxic, really toxic legacy of Slobodan Milošević regime and push us further into that legacy and send a very strong message to all journalists in Serbia that they cannot feel safe if they work in the public interest.
Very serious concerns. Before I come to Jürgen, though, Walid, I want you to reflect on some of the themes which Ivana mentioned there, which I think touched on some of your concerns when you said, when I asked you, are you concerned? You said yes. Yes. The idea of, I think you mentioned, you said double standards. And I think that's a theme that Ivana is getting at, the seriousness of the legal process and whether there is real appetite, legal appetite, political appetite to advance a case. Is that on your mind when you hear stories like this and you think, oh my God, 7 months could become 24 years, God forbid?
Not only that, let me just read this quotation from Dr. Marinello, international law expert around all these things. He wrote, from legal point of view, the double standard policy applied by Western countries is unacceptable policy. International law mechanism cannot be applied in some cases and ignored in others. For example, he said, 43 countries have referred to the ICC in the case of Ukraine. They include 5 countries that have opposed the ICC probe in Palestine. This selectivity is not only concerning when it comes to the international community. And he had it, and his example is Shireen Abu Akleh in this issue.
Right. Okay, I want to bring in Jürgen for your reflections. Even though, of course, the Shireen case, it does not involve an incident in Europe, obviously the case that Ivana is talking about is within Europe. It's occurring in a candidate country for the EU as well. And it's not the only one, right? There are many other cases, sadly. The one of Jan Kuciak and his fiancée in Slovakia who were murdered. A week ago, I think it was exactly a week ago today, the main suspect in that killing was acquitted. So the themes that we're hearing of the unequal pace of justice or appetite in justice. Now, I know we're not going to try and hold Jürgen to the fire. He doesn't represent the governments or the justice systems. But as someone who oversees this process, tell me your thoughts and concerns. Are you, no doubt, have concern sometimes when you see the process of calling to accountability going on in European countries?
Well, thank you, Sami. And I think basically what I'm going to say is very much tying into what Ivana and Walid have already said, and unfortunately, yes, we do have cases in Europe, and it's not only Jan Kuciak. We had Daphne Caruana Galizia, we had cases in Greece, in the Netherlands, and so it really shows that this is a problem that is not tied to any specific region, and I think we also do see the commonalities in those cases. Very often we have quick successes when it comes to identifying the actual perpetrators and the hitman, but then we see how deep those cases actually really go. And identifying the masterminds that stand behind them, unfortunately, does take years. And
what delays it? Is it really just a matter of the legal process, or, as many suspect, that sometimes these cases cross across the nexus of power, the legal system, and organized crime?
Well, I think, Sami, we can only probably speculate in some of the cases, but I do think that it, first of all, shows how important the work was that those journalists were working on and how deep this was going into what is going on in the societies and in those states. But it also shows how important it is that we really solve those cases in a sustainable manner and not only on the surface, because if those issues remain, they will have repercussions for the future of the countries. And this is also what we are trying to do when we approach those cases from the perspective of the OSCE representative on freedom of the media. We try to put them into the bigger context of what it means for democracy, what this means for the ability of journalists to actually report on issues like organized crime, corruption, or political scandals or political power issues, and what it means if we cannot provide them with a safe environment in the long run, because simply we will lose that information. And it is really important. And I think there's one thing that also those countries that were affected do recognize. It comes with a reputational cost. It shows a lot about, can I trust the rule of law in that country? Can I trust the institutions? This has implications on foreign investment, on development and everything. And I think this is really how we should probably approach it, because I hope that this is a motivation to really
That's a good point.
into it.
I want to try and bring in Ivana in a second, but just a reminder for everyone, in about 10 minutes, we'll open up the floor for questions. So do start thinking of any questions that you might have for the panelists, and we'll bring them in. But Ivana, listening to what Jürgen was saying there, the bigger picture of the state of democracy, that kind of is linked to what you and I were discussing yesterday about how what happened in the case you're following is part of a bigger picture of where intimidation, state influence and capture of journalism is going. It's not just an individual who's killed, right?
Definitely, and the failure to bring justice in the case of Slavko Ćuruvija, but not only for him. We have 2 dead journalists also, unresolved death of Dada Vujasinović from 1994, and the killing of Milan Pantić in 2001. We have no information whatsoever about, not any indictments or anything. And it of course creates an atmosphere in which it is not safe to be a journalist in Serbia. And I have to say, unfortunately, this feeling, this toxic atmosphere for journalistic work is nowadays being driven by the government and the highest level of government officials. We at Slavko Ćuruvija Foundation are monitoring the verbal attacks, targeting and intimidation of journalists by the government and government-supported tabloids, which pose propaganda machinery in Serbia. And I have to say, preliminary count that in the first 4 months of this year, we counted over 170 individual verbal attacks and targeting in propaganda media outlets toward critical journalists. And this is something that really creates very toxic atmosphere. I also have to say, I'm sorry, that today we will have a huge government rally in Belgrade, which is a counter rally to protests that occurred because of two shocking public shootings occurred in Serbia. And we are today very, very frightened for the safety of critical journalists who will report from that rally, because yesterday in Serbian parliament...
These were the school killings. These were not...
Yes,
these were the
school killings.
So even for a common, between brackets, story like that, journalists are now thinking twice about, can I go out and cover a rally for
yesterday in Serbian parliament, the critical journalists were accused by a member of the ruling party that they are responsible for creating atmosphere in Serbian society that led to the school shooting. So this is really dangerous.
Targeting of journalists.
Targeting of journalists, and it was reinforced by Serbian PM also yesterday in Parliament. So we are really concerned for the safety of those journalists that will report today.
We do hope that they come away safe. Waleed, listening to that, you mentioned earlier that Shireen's case may have attracted a lot of attention, but it's not the first, is it? Take us through the sort of history of killings and what that creates in terms of an environment of intimidation, of fear of journalists, Palestinians as well as foreigners who want to cover the story.
Since the first day of the Israeli occupation to the Palestinian territories in June '67, 104 Palestinian journalists were killed until now. Since 2001 until now, 20 Palestinian journalists, including 2 foreigners, were killed. No accountability at all for that. When we demand justice for Shireen, and I will try to clarify why it's important for us. First, we want the international prosecutor and Israel to understand that Israel can no longer act with impunity when it harasses or intimidates or murders journalists who are trying to undertake their professional duties. Second, it's why it's important. It's not important for us as Al Jazeera journalists or Palestinian journalists. It's important even for the future Palestinian generations. And to emphasize the importance of that, let me tell you these small stories about it. A lot of people visiting Shireen's office in our bureau in Ramallah daily. Some they coming just to light candles, others to put roses, others just to express their sympathy. But in the last 3 months, 2 distinguished groups came to our office. 4 students from the 5th grade from Ramallah Al Francis School, that they have a study project titled Human Rights for Journalists in the Palestinian occupied territories, and they took Shireen as a model. And when I asked them, why you choosing Shireen? They said, first of all, because we respect her, and we choosing her as a model because she inspiring our work, and we accepted and respected her works. The second group, distinguished group, even more important, was students 15 to 17 from hearing disabled people from Al Shagaf institution in Nablus. They prepared a mosaic mural with a picture of Shireen and olive leaves, and they marked with their sign like this, which means thank you.
In sign language.
When I asked what the message that you want to deliver here, to us, they said just we want to say thank you to Shireen. because she made and did a lot of stories about people with needs. For these future generations, we demand justice, not only for us, for the situation. Second thing, as I mentioned before, Israel must understand that can no longer act with impunity. 104 Palestinian journalists were killed, and 20 in the last 20 years. After Shireen, 20 days after the murder of Shireen, they killed a young female journalist from Hebron called Ghofran Warasni, which means that they continue to kill. And when they shot Shireen, and all the investigative reports emphasize that, and this is the fact, they continue shooting, which means they targeted her.
Right. Yeah. So normalization of the killings of journalists, the facilitation of that. Jürgen, we were talking about that in terms of the political context earlier. The more that societies, even, or some would say especially in Europe, are becoming politically polarized, is that kind of facilitating, creating the ambience that somehow indirectly legitimizes the targeting of journalists, and the sort of fear that Ivana is talking about now, that, hey, if I have to go and cover even a rally or a school shooting, I've got to watch my back.
No, thank you, Sami, for bringing that up. And I think this is a really important aspect, because actually, I mean, in a way, when we talk about impunity, we're talking about something where it's already too late. I think we really have to understand what are the reasons, what are the root causes, and what are the trends that can lead to that. And we certainly see I would say, with the rise of populism in Europe, also a new political elite that is very much attacking journalists, putting them into position as liars, which also legitimizes a certain distrust, but also certain violence against them. And I think this is a climate that we do need to understand. It also probably emboldens a lot of perpetrators online. And I think the online sphere is also something that we really need to look into, because
the digital demonization of
absolutely.
How does one control that? That's, I guess, the $6 million question, right? And if he had an answer to that, I guess he would be in a very different position today.
I would love to have it, not only for the 6 million, but I think it would really be helpful. No, but I think we do have parts of the answer. And looking at some of the crimes that we did see, for example, the case of Daphne Caruana Galizia, there was a lot of online hate and a lot of online violence that happened before. And we are now actually engaged with our office in work that is looking into those cases and tries to find indicators from which we can see what can aggravate those cases. So very often it is if you have support from political figures, special groups, and we hope that with those patterns and with those indicators, we can see or identify those cases that might escalate and then really lead to offline violence, where people would either get injured or, in the worst case, even killed. So I think this is probably part of the answer. Right. So we are working on that. And of course, I think we also have to engage with social media platforms. I mean, we do need transparency. There also needs to be a lot of work on their side in order to remedy and react to such cases, which I think can overall really put oil on the fire in a climate that makes it even more insecure for journalists to operate, and especially women, if we speak about online violence.
All right, very briefly, Walid, in a few sentences, what ultimately are you seeking? What constitutes justice for Shireen? Let me give you a mic.
First of all, we want to hold the killer accountable. This is important for us. We cannot continue without accountability against these murders. Second, the Israelis, they must admit that who killed Shireen was the occupation troops stationed in the entrance to Jenin refugee camp. Because Shireen and the group, including Ali Samoudi, who injured a few minutes before, and Mujahid Saadi and Shada Hanaishi, who combined with Shireen, all of them, they wearing the helmet labeled press and the protective jacket labeled also press, and the bullet, the fatal bullet who hit Shireen behind the left ear in the area that not protected by the helmet and the vest, which means that she was targeted by sniper. It's clear. And for that, as I said before, I repeat that again, Israel and the international prosecutor, they must understand that Israel cannot continue, or Israel can no longer even act with impunity in these issues. For the Palestinian journalists, 104 Palestinian journalists, they were killed since '67 until now.
Okay. And Ivan, I'm going to ask you the same question. What ultimately for you constitutes justice? And what help can organizations like ours?
Just add something.
Okay, go ahead. Let me give you the mic.
Regarding your question, and we want to bring justice because we don't want, as I said, the future generations, Palestinian generation, to lose their hope and to lose their confidence in the international legitimacy and justice and the international institutions and the international law. And this is, I think, is a crucial issue for us and for others.
Right, so there's a lot at stake. Ivana.
Same here, actually. We also heavily rely upon international organizations and institutions to support us in this struggle. And this is something that has been shown as crucial thing because our governments, the autocratic governments, are, it seems, only sensitive from critiques and pressure from abroad. Last month in Belgrade, we have had representatives of 9 international organizations, IPI included, that marked the anniversary of the killing of Slavko Ćuruvija, and it was a tremendous demonstration of support, which really had an echo in Serbian society, in Serbian media, and this is something we need to continue for all the places like Serbia. We need the eyes of all organizations directed to those countries, and just by being there, by issuing statements, by demanding justice, they can support us in our work on the ground.
All right, thank you so much. I think it's time to open up the floor for questions. And we've got our lovely lady at the back with the microphone, so put your hand up if you have a question. I just want to make a slight announcement. Okay, Frane's got a question. I want to make an announcement before we start with the questions. Just a reminder that 2 Al Jazeera journalists are being held in prisons. We've got their photos here. Rabia Sheikh for 3 years, Bahauddin Ibrahim 4 years in Egypt. And by the testimony of human rights organizations in following unfair trials, which some investigative organizations like RSF have called the weaponization of using the judicial system as a form of judicial harassment. So we want to point out and hope that there'll be some good news in their release soon. I think Frane.
Sorry for using the fact that I already have a microphone, but I thought it's something that it might be interesting to hear from Ivana is how did the investigation or the reopening of the investigation of Slavko Ćuruvija take place? Because how do you restart an investigation into a murder which took place 24 years ago? I think it's an important element and it's an example that can be used in many other countries.
We have had establishment of the Commission for Investigation of Killed Journalists, representative of which is here with us today. And this was the body that gathered not only people from the system that is established to protect journalists, meaning police and prosecutor's office, but also journalists and media representatives. And the commission worked very closely with institutions and finally brought the perpetrators, we hope, to justice. What is, I think, was crucial in that case was that the Commission has people from Commission were able to manage to stay in contact and be in contact with individuals who were really strongly dedicated to solving the case. And unfortunately, I think in the countries that lack concrete and firm rule of law system, you always depend on individuals who will have the courage and and have the resolve and have the willingness to push things through.
We're talking about from the public, citizens.
No, I'm not now speaking about citizens, but policemen who were involved in the investigation and who received threats also, but nevertheless continued to push for the successful investigation.
So finding courageous people inside the state.
Inside the system who will be willing to, to
That's
push.
an important lesson, perhaps. Any other questions from the floor? Can we get a microphone for Rawan here, please?
I first would like to salute Walid Al-Omari for being for decades working on the ground and getting the voice of Palestine. Getting the word Palestine here up with your name, Walid, is also a big thing in the international world that doesn't recognize Palestine in many states. How immunity can be done under occupation. There is a double there. Maybe in the other worlds of the world it's different, but in Palestine, under the occupation, immunity is doubled. And how you, as a dear friend of Shireen and all the office, got into this mental support to make this process happen. It's not only Shireen family, but also as a family working with Shireen for decades as well. How we can also on international level care about mental support for journalists who knew her very well. Thank you.
You know, the reality is very tough and very complicated and very dangerous in the Palestinian territories, and for journalists especially it's more dangerous than others because you have to act under different kinds of authorities. In the West Bank you have the occupation authorities and you have the Palestinian Authority. In Gaza you have the Hamas Authority, and you cannot leave Gaza even without Israeli permissions if you want to leave Gaza or to go out, and the same in the West Bank. And you have the Palestinians who are working as journalists in East Jerusalem, and they didn't have even the Palestinian ID or the Palestinian passports. They have the laissez-passer, and they have sometimes the Jordanian passports or Americans or others. And for them even the situation is complicated. And the fourth part of the Palestinians, journalists who are Palestinians from inside the Green Line, inside Israel, who have the Israeli passport. But all of them, they are suffering from all this complication situation. Regarding the Shireen legacy and Shireen case, first of all, we trying to keep his legacy alive. And Al Jazeera Media Network and Ramallah Municipality, they put the cornerstone for a museum will carry Shireen's name. It will called Shireen Museum for Media in Ramallah, and we hope that we will open it in the 3rd anniversary of the killing in the May 25. Second thing, what is important, Shireen case became a public opinion, international public opinion case, and because that we keep to push and we keep to talk about Shireen case because she represents not only Shireen or Al Jazeera or the Palestinians. She sacrificed herself for the journalism or for delivering the fact to the people. And who killed Shireen? He broke in the mirror. Because he didn't want this mirror to reflect the bad things that he doing in the ground. And for that, you see that what's happened to Shireen. Shireen, as I can say, they killed Shireen twice. They killed Shireen when they shot her in Jenin, while she trying to do his job as a journalist, and they killed Shireen when they attacked the casket and they attacked the people and beaten the people inside the French hospital in Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood in East Jerusalem. And because that it's important, why they attacking the casket at least? They shot her in Jenin and they continue even to attack Shireen and attack her legacy even. They didn't want the impact of this murder in the public.
Okay. I just want to bring in for a brief comment, then we'll take Jürgen, since we're talking about how to keep cases going on. Give us your perspective as the OSCE of what are the important lessons or things one can do. And we've got another important case which you touched upon, that of Daphne Galizia. That's been going on for a while. What sort of issues can help keep the fire burning?
Well, I think, first of all, we all need to work together on that. And I would really like to thank, first of all, civil society, but also media representatives in keeping those cases alive. And I think, the work that you are doing with your foundation is really crucial. What we can do is to simply add the voice of the representative on freedom of the media as an intergovernmental organization. And this is exactly what we do, because we have made it a standard practice that to follow up on all those cases for as long as it's needed, to really keep them on the agenda and engage with governments whenever we have the chance, visiting countries or in other fora, to really make sure that we can see some progress on that, but also underlining what is at stake. And I think this is really necessary also in our conversations with states and with authorities, to really make them understand this is not just an individual case. This is something that really has implications for society. This has implications on your institutions and on the future of the country if it remains unsolved.
All right, I think we had a question, the gentleman at the back, and then we'll try and take the gentleman here in the third row as well. But go ahead, sir.
Thank you very much. My name is Kiruba. I am a human rights defender, also write investigative articles. Glad to hear about impunity in different parts of the world. I don't think impunity is going to end today or tomorrow. It's a never-ending issue. My question to Mr. Omari, considering the history of ICC, do you really believe you will find justice for Shireen from ICC? Okay. Why can't you find different mechanism to find justice other than wasting your time with ICC? Thank you very much.
Okay, all right. Walid, I'll let you answer that briefly, and then we'll try and get the gentleman in who's been waiting patiently. Go ahead. So do you think
First, we want to bring justice for Shireen. This issue is very important for all the people.
He's asking why the ICC?
Why the ICC? Because we didn't have another address. We will try even to continue our efforts to bring this justice through the ICC and without the ICC.
And he's saying, are you confident you'll get it?
You asked this before. You asked this before. It's very difficult. What I can say, I even have this quotation from professor from Europe who said about the double standards and how they are acting.
All right. Okay, the gentleman here. Please go ahead, sir.
Oh, it's Ken McQuarrie, formerly board member of the IPI and formerly of the BBC. First of all, it's a privilege to listen to the panel and Walid and the range of knowledge that you have. But I think there are two important principles. One is that we never forget, and the second is that we inform. And I think on the first, never forgetting, I don't think that the 2nd of November, which is the United Nations Impunity Day, is widely recognized in the general public. Do the panel think that there are devices or ways that across nations that we could cooperate to make sure that that has a greater significance than it actually has at the moment? And secondly, I don't believe that the public in general and young people and even some journalists are informed about the scale that Walid has outlined in terms of the number of journalists killed. Although in this room, with the wonderful work the IPI does, it's close to our heart, I don't think it is a general penetration or cut through with the public. Do the panel have any ideas as to how we meet these two things, never forgetting and informing?
Okay, it's a good question. Time to inspect ourselves, a little bit of introspection there. Who would like to go? He asked the question to the panel. Who would like to have a go at those two?
Thank you. Yes, this is something never forget or always remember is something we are trying to do with Slavko Čurovija Foundation, and we are always reporting on any detail that has been said in court. It is now, I would say, most comprehensive database on what was going on, and also trying to bring about people, to just make an echo of the name of Slavko Čurovija and the case in Serbian media and abroad. But to your question of how people to understand what it means, I think that we need to find a way to explain to the people that if a journalist is killed, your right to be informed, to make informed decisions has been killed with him. And I think that we somehow fail to deliver that message, and we should probably do more on
Ivana,
that.
to the gentleman's point, do you think we could do more as journalists across borders and working together?
Of course.
Maybe through platforms like the IPI, for example. Are we using our full potential, I think was what the gentleman was getting at, as journalists, or are we all pigeonholed in our national borders and issues?
It seems that we are, and yes, the IPI and organizations like that are tremendous platforms that we can all share and make the cases visible, and that is something we have tried with this year anniversary of Slavko Čurovia Foundation, when 9 organizations came to Belgrade and spread the word globally about the issue that is very old, the case that is very old, and people are becoming forgetting about Slavko Čurovia, somebody who has been born, then has now finished the university and has a job and maybe even a family, and we are still waiting for justice. So we need to constantly remind people about the cases, and not only Slavko Čurovia, but all the cases of the killed journalists.
Okay, Walid, I'll let you chime in, and then we'll come in for a final comment from Jürgen, and then I think our time is truly up. Go ahead.
It's important to engage in this issue in the whole world. First of all, the UNESCO, they have the statistics for the 2022, said that the killing of journalists everywhere in the world increased 50% just in 2022. Second thing, what is important here, that's the issue that Shireen was iconic or recognizable or household name everywhere in the world. We must try together to stop this impunity for all the regimes everywhere. You know, Sami and me, we are from Al Jazeera, but 12 of our colleagues sacrificed their lives since 2003 until now. In Iraq, in Syria, in Palestine, in Libya, and many other places, which mean that this job became very dangerous for all of us. And if we were going to risk our lives just because we want to deliver the fact to the people, it means that we have to combine our efforts together and to go ahead. Because that, I said, it's obliged us to engage together because we want to save also our lives.
All right, that's a good point.
May I just, I'm sorry, I stole the microphone. Just one sentence to add to the previous thing I said. I also think we need to build a greater solidarity among journalists and media community, and this solidarity will then bring, keep the stories alive and focus of the public in the killings in the focus on the public. So solidarity is another thing that we need to work more on, I think.
It's a good point. Maybe we can take it into consideration of the IPI as well and see how to coordinate better between the journalists. Jürgen, I'm going to ask you to weigh in on those themes, the issue of what, as you can see it, you analyze the state of civil society and journalists in banding together to, as the gentleman called for, inform and not let people forget these issues.
Honestly, there's not much that I can add, but to fully second what has already been said, I think, Impunity Day is every day. And even if the 2nd of November is a really important day where we can really join forces and join our voices to make this cause heard, I think it is really the everyday work that we need in keeping those stories alive, keep the memory alive, because I think it is really important to also illustrate those are real cases. This is not an abstract threat. Those were real persons, they were working on important issues, and as Ivana said before, I think we also have to really make that link and say, this is the cost that we pay, that societies pay, that every citizen pays if journalists are not safe to report, and what it really means for us. And yes,
and there are cases, Jürgen, right? 19, I think, was the number I came of killings of journalists, and then, you know, some of the countries, like in Russia, you're talking about 83 journalists killed in the last 2 decades. These are very real numbers.
Those are very real numbers, those are very real cases, and those journalists were working on very real and important issues, and I think this is the story that we have to get out, and this is what we have to underline.
All right, wonderful. I think our time is up. I'd like to thank our panelists, Jürgen, Ivana, and Walid. Thank you very much for your contributions, and thank you for being a fabulous audience.